is Alex Sarr? What type of player is he? Just to give people an idea in their mind as they listen to this.
So Alex Sarr is a very newly 19-year-old big man. One of the appeals to him is that he is one of the younger players in this class, turned 19 years old just, I think, 2 or 3 days before we recorded this podcast. Going to be 19 for the high majority of his rookie season. Like you said, 7'1", 216 pounds, extremely mobile and athletic for his size. Not necessarily the strongest of frame, as you can tell from that 216-pound listing, but he moves like every bit of a like lighter, mobile big man that, like you said, can play both the 4 or the 5 with his size and quickness. Very reminiscent of like recent prospects, Evan Mobley, Chet Holmgren, maybe not the same type of player, but definitely has a similar height and speed package. Overall, just a very good player in the last couple of years. Came up with Real Madrid's youth program, went to Overtime Elite for a season, or 2 seasons rather, with Overtime Elite, and then left after 22-23 for the NBL, where he has played with the Perth Wildcats all year. He missed I think almost exactly a month with a knee injury during the season. But other than that, played all year, was one of their best players on the team. Obviously, as a top draft prospect, was getting a ton of attention and still popped in very intriguing ways, had a ton of flashes. And that's why he's at the top of many draft boards. And maybe not yours, but Alex Sarr is my number 1 prospect currently. And I mean, he has been for almost the entire draft process. I believe I started with Topic at 1 and Sarr at 2 and then flipped. So yeah, this is probably my favorite player in the draft, on top of having him as my number 1 right now. He is just an absolutely sick defender.
The Overtime Elite time of his career was super interesting because that was last year. The Thompson twins were in overtime where Alex Sarr was playing. And because of where the Hornets were going to be picking, I scouted the Thompson twins pretty extensively. I think I probably watched between 8 to 12 Overtime Elite games last year. And I noticed Alex Sarr playing in overtime. And at the time, he was not really highly regarded to be a top pick in the draft. I think he was like a late first, second round guy. And I could see why. I was like, well, he's got some length. He has flashes some shooting potential. He can obviously block shots. But he was still like very much a theoretical player. Like all the tools, but like he didn't impact the game anywhere like you would expect a top caliber player to in overtime. So I've struggled, especially early in the year when I was watching him, to get that out of my head, because I watched 12 games of potentially the first overall pick last year, and I just thought he was like a second round guy. So that is something that I kind of like still wrestle with in my analysis now, but it's definitely interesting to say he has definitely got better and come a long way in those 12 months.
Yeah, and people don't really I feel like people kind of forget that he was in Overtime Elite because he did spend 2 years there. And like you said, was not necessarily like a highly regarded NBA guy. And that jump that he made from OTE to the NBL in terms of like competition level, and especially like the change in style of play between those 2 leagues, is extremely stark. And he handled it about as well as you really could ask for a big man, especially one that's like not overly strong and whose frame maybe needs a little bit of development or to be filled out before he's, at his peak per se. But he handled it about as well as you could have asked for, I think, like from an NBA perspective, at least. Like, I don't know what you would have wanted him to show in the NBL that he didn't show in OTE and vice versa. Because he's and OTE is obviously transition based. So he's shown that he can be quick out in space and, run the floor for big man, stuff like that. And also in the NBL showed that he can play in the half court, operate as a DHO guy, a ball screen guy in the offense. He can guard, drop coverage, and pick and roll. He's versatile. So to me, like, especially having watched him in OTE with all the Thompson twin games that we watched last year, it just like solidifies that background in a way. So I'm all in on Alex Sarr at the moment. Anyway, I've had a hard time like selling myself on players' ceiling over his. Like I feel like there's no player that has the combination of like production of what we've already seen and the ceiling of what could come in the next 3, 4, 5 years.
So I should probably do this at the end, but this could also help give people an idea into what type of player he is. I'm going to give you, let's see here, 5 or 6 names of comps And I want you to tell me which one or two you think are most interesting. And I've got a range here from like low end to super high end. And I want to say, at one point, my super low end was Kai Jones, and I took it out because I thought that was unfair to Alex Sarr. But let's go in order here. Tell me which of these stands out. Jalen Smith from the Indiana Pacers, the stretch four. Evan Mobley from the Cleveland Cavaliers. Nick Claxton from the Brooklyn Nets. Jaren Jackson Jr. from the Memphis Grizzlies, former Defensive Player of the Year. And Jonathan Isaac with the Orlando Magic.
I actually really like John Isaac. That's not one I've thought about a ton. I feel like Evan Mobley is the popular one, and I don't disagree with that. But Evan Mobley, I think, has a much better like feel for the game and is definitely a better shooter. At least like right now, as we sit in late April during the playoffs, like I think Evan Mobley is probably a better shooter. But I really like the John Isaac one now that I think about it, because that doesn't really. Like the shooting doesn't have to come around for Alex Sarr for him to be John Isaac. Like that's probably the one thing that you can really knock with his offense right now is that he's, marketed as a shooting big, or at least somebody that can stretch the floor for you. He was at 25.5% last year with OTE, 29.8% with the Perth Wildcats this year in the NBL. So has never really been an efficient shooter from deep, despite the fact that he has, I would say, decent mechanics for his size, especially. And is definitely not shy of taking them either, which you can, argue one way or another that that's a positive, but you would typically like to see a guy be, a little bit more efficient than 30%. So, but the John Isaac comp, like John Isaac's not a great shooter. So I feel like that would definitely be where that comes in.
I think John Isaac, some people say like he is maybe the best pound for pound defender in the NBA, and maybe Sarr doesn't quite have like the strength element that I think Isaac has on that end. But Isaac came in pretty thin out of college, out of Florida State as well. When he was drafted, he's developed into that as he's got into his, the kind of back end of his career. You talk about the shot. Let's just do it now. I think I'm categorizing this as a weakness, but like long term, if he's 7'2" and can even shoot okay, it could be a strength. I know you spent a lot of time. I completely agree. You spent a lot of time watching Sarr today. I watched every single one of his 3-point attempts from both Perth and from the 2 games he played against the G League Ignite in the exhibition games. And I did some kind of manual charting of his shots, and here's what I learned. Open catch and shoots, he shot 32.5%. On contested catch and shoots, he shot 35%. But on pull-ups, he shot just 14.3%. And that's what's really dragged his percentages that you referenced down there for kind of the season. That's what really dragged it down. And then on top of that, of his kind of total of 55 or so 3-point attempts of the season, 7 of those were like awful misses, like barely grazed the rim or air balls or like hit off the backboard type style. So I guess after sharing those numbers, does that make that a little bit rosier for you, that shooting outlook? When you look at 35% on contested closeout catch and shoots in the senior league in Australia, maybe that's not too bad.
No, I really don't think it is. And like you do have to do a lot of projecting. Like he's 7'2", he's never shot efficiently overall, and like you do have to get into a little bit of a nitty-gritty like specific category before you can say that he's efficient in like any one area. Like you could pull up his shot chart and be like I would be willing to bet you that he's a good shooter from like the above the break area, but not at all from the wings, like just off the top of my head. Like
didn't get many from the wings. They were mostly kind of from like above the break to the side, like a lot of kind of like he would flare out of a pick and roll to kind of like the wing, like the top of the arc, and shoot from there. He didn't get many from the corners. I'm talking there was like 3 or 4 total attempts, so it's not even enough to know what to do with it.
And he really only shoots coming out of those ball screens, like you said. Like he doesn't run out of any sort of action, really. Like he doesn't get a ton of them in transition. It's mostly just like threes being fed to him for like the specific purpose of getting him that shot. Like, and that's not, a problem necessarily, but if he is a shooting big in like that, like a literal sense of that term, he does need to be able to diversify that a little bit once he gets into the league. But there was another thing that actually caught my eye while I was looking at it today. He shot 48% on dribble jumpers via synergy, which that was only 29 total attempts on the year. But I mean, he was still at 50% on off the dribble jumpers, like small sample size, specific scenario that, like, honestly, he's probably not going to be in very often in the NBA. You don't really want your 7'2" big man with questionable efficiency and mechanics taking threes off the dribble. But like, to me, that just shows, and combine that with your contested catch and shoot stat, he can make difficult shots, which is obviously, like, that's obviously harder than just hitting like a wide open three in the corner or something like that. He just needs to be able to adjust his like approach, his mechanics, like how he plays the game and where he positions himself offensively to be able to make those shots. But like, that could not happen is the only downside. But like, if it does, like you said, he doesn't have to shoot like a super high percentage. He 33, 34%, and he's going to force defenses to guard him. He doesn't need to be an absolute 40% sniper or something like that. So it's like a big step to take, but once he makes it, it's going to make like exponential improvements on his game, I feel like.
Oh, if he shoots the ball 34%, like,
he's going to be so good.
Like, he's the number 1 overall pick in this draft. I just don't know if he will.
Yeah.
And that's the challenge. Like, he get a lot of his shots playing center in Australia. That's basically where he played. And the other opposing big is just staying in the paint. So he was just like stepping into open shots, or like had a smaller like 6'4" guy rotating to him. He's not really being guarded. Like, in the NBA, he probably projects, in my opinion, as a power forward. And Terrence Oglesby was on the podcast last week, said the same thing. He thinks he's a 4, not a 5, just because he's super narrow in the shoulders, in the legs, in the waist. Like, he is definitely kind of like stringy rather than solid, and he will just get pounded inside. So he is then going to basically be changing position while coming to the NBA, which is like another whole change from like how he plays defense, what his role is in offense. That is a change that I don't think anyone should take for granted. And I also question, like, how will he get his 3-point attempts when he's being guarded by like a wing? Like, I had this thought. I think other teams could just put like their 6'7" wing on Alex Sarr, and I don't know if he can actually do anything to beat him off the dribble. And I don't think he's a good enough shooter to dribble over him, because we'll get into the ball handling. Yikes. So I just don't know how versatile he is going to be able to be used on offense.
That is actually a very good point. Like, just, I mean, this is a Hornets podcast, so we might as well think of it this way. Do you think like a Hornets lineup with Grant Williams at the 5 could guard Alex Sarr at the 5? Like, I think that would, like, right now, I think that would probably work. Like, I think Grant could at least bother him and frustrate him to a point where it wouldn't be an effective lineup, and they would probably have to move him back to the 4. So yeah, that's actually that's a very good point. But to be fair though, that may be best for him long term also, because he'll be developing those ball skills and shooting much more so than if you had to put him at the 5 and you needed him to be like a rim runner more often than you needed him to expand on the, I guess, like, creation aspect of his game, because that's the only thing that he's really not. Like, I think he has a decent feel for the game. He's obviously a good finisher around the rim just due to his size, and he's a pretty decent athlete vertically, even if that's not the standout skill with his athleticism. It's the mobility. But the strength obviously hinders him a little bit. But right now, it's just the ability to put the ball on the floor in any facet.
Let's get into his finishing around the rim. You talked about it there, some of the offensive rebounding, his athleticism. I think he's got a great second jump. Like, the ball's getting battered around the rim, and Alex Sarr just like comes out of nowhere, despite his frame, is able to get balls, tip balls, finish them. I think that's really impressive. Like, when he actually gets out in transition, like, quite a lot, really, for a big. I think he was like 18% of his possessions were in transition. So he's definitely a fluid mover, runs the floor really well. His like rim attacking or rim finishing, it's strange, because a lot of the time he goes to like these kind of swirling hooks or like soft touch floaters, which for someone who's that size, you're like, oh, that's interesting, right? That's touch. But equally, he is allergic to contact going towards the rim, and a lot of the time he's doing those spins and hooks to kind of get away from rim protectors. But I guess I think I'm probably like neutral on him as a rim finisher. I think he's got some skill and craft, and some natural size and athleticism. But I don't think he is if he catches the ball with a foot in the paint, I don't have great confidence it's going down, especially if there's size in there.
Yeah, and the other thing is that he's not like he plays hard and has a high motor, so I don't want to like phrase it as like a negative, but he's not the most like aggressive finisher, I guess. Like he's not trying to go up and dunk on you. Like you said, he's trying to go up and like finish with some touch over the top so he doesn't have to use any like put any contact on you, because at this moment it's not a strength for him at all to be able to finish through contact. I think though, if you built that strength up and it maybe 2 years in the NBA system, he's stronger in some way. Like I feel like that's like the shooting. It's just going to make like an exponential increase, even though it's like a slightly smaller thing. He's so big though. That's the thing. He's so tall. He has shooting touch. He has good footwork in the low post as well. Like I feel like all he's got to do is just be able to withstand some contact so that he can finish over like other centers. He's never going to be able to be like a bruiser per se, but that's where he would be able to utilize that touches against those types of guys. And then he takes like a Jaren Jackson or Evan Mobley or Kristaps Porzingis or another guy that's like that big and is just able to use his length and finish over the top, because he is one of the guys that's not going to have somebody else lining up against him that's taller than him more than 6 or 7 times a year, you know?
The big advantage is he has the height and the length, right? To do that. He doesn't need to necessarily overpower people. He can just finish over them. Equally, I've just seen enough like young players now where it's like, oh, when he's in the league and he gets stronger, he'll be better at finishing at the rim. And it just doesn't always happen. JT Thor's put on so much muscle since he's come into the league. Still can't finish around the rim at all. And yes, there are situations like you can point to someone like Jalen Williams at OKC, how much he's got strong and improved. So it does happen. But just looking like his style of play, his body, I just think he'll always be someone who is a finesse player and will always look to beat with craft and skill rather than ever being able to kind of finish through people. Let's move on to the defense. Just if people haven't, because people have probably watched highlights of Sarr by now, just tell people what they have in store for them if they want to see Alex Sarr play defense, Chase.
I watched a couple of games today, and like I queued up all of his half-court defense clips on Synergy. That dude is just crazy good on defense. And maybe it's the weakness of this class that's just blurring my vision and making me think that he's a lot better than he is. But I don't know, man. If you watch like a lot of tape on him, like full possessions, not like just highlights of him getting a block or a steal or walling somebody off or whatever, full possessions, that dude is locked in on defense. He wants to play defense. And I think he had an understanding of like, I am a teenager in a pro league. If I don't like pay attention and have like attention to detail and focus and really care about my performance on this end, these guys are going to kick my ass. And that's exactly what would have happened. Like the only time he struggles on that end is when he matches up against like some burly, strong center like Aaron Baines. Like that, then he might get back down in the post. But otherwise, he's so big, he's able to, even if he gets moved around, he stays straight up. That's another big thing, is so many bigs love to bring their arms down when someone shoots. His stays straight up a lot of the time because he knows he can use that length and block shots pretty much no matter what in that league with guys that are a little bit
smaller.
smaller.
Say, by the way, I didn't think we said this. He is 7'1", 7'2" with a 7'5" wingspan. That
Huge.
probably puts him in like similar length basically as Mark Williams.
Yeah.
But he's playing, say, probably playing power forward, not center. So just to put in, when we talk about the length, we are talking about kind of like he has elite length for some NBA big men. Never mind guys who can play at the 4.
Right. And he sticks with guards and wings when they drive too, which that's what like really appeals to me and makes him able to play the 4. He can pick up a guard on the perimeter, stick with them the whole way to the rim, and then he will just absolutely plaster your shot into the 3rd row or right back into your bench. There's no very rare occasions where he like loses a step on a guy and gets beat. Like he can really move his feet in space against even the quickest guards in the NBL and the most skilled guys. Like Matthew Dellavedova, like really good NBA players or like seasoned NBA players like Denzel Valentine. Like he stays in front of everyone. And right now, like off ball especially is maybe even better. Like he's good in nail help. He's good in the drop coverage. He's good off ball rotating and for block shots and getting in passing lanes. He's just like a general deterrent around the rim with how long he is. And he just deters players from making plays in his direction at all. Because like I said, he's so like attentive on that end for a player that is a teenager in a pro league with so many other physical bigs. Like he is aware, he has extreme length, and he has like the timing and instincts to be able to utilize all of it. And it is in a league like the NBA, like I think his defense is going to fit even better. He's going to be very switchable, very scheme versatile. It's like stuff that NBA teams look for out of guys that are playing the front court. Like the only thing he doesn't have is the strength, and that's going to be, you know, a little bit more difficult in the NBA for him to defend like the biggest, strongest bigs in the world, basically. But you are not going to see any sort of flaws really come up when he is switching, guarding in space, clamping up on guys that are smaller than him on the perimeter. Like that is where he's going to shine and what's going to really make teams think like this guy could be a dangerous defender in a couple of years.
Yeah, eloquently put. I've really got nothing to add. I think one of my notes was he's as good defending on the perimeter as he is on the interior. And
100%.
When you're 7'1" with a 7'5" wingspan, that is a dangerous tool to use. You know, you can use him in so many ways. And because he doesn't have to play center, potentially, then he can cause more havoc off the ball, helping, right? You've seen that a little bit in this playoffs where teams like, I think Rudy Gobert has like been, he doesn't guard Nikola Jokic because they put Karl Towns on him, and then Gobert can affect and be that second side help defender. And you can potentially use Sarr in that same way. Like he had some possessions when he played the Ignite. He had 2 possessions where he just made Ron Holland look like he wanted to go home. Like he stayed with him all the way. Ron Holland just putting all the moves on him. He blocked his pull up. He turned it over another time. He had one position where he blocked Matas Buzelis twice in the same possession. Just all the instincts and like that quick second jump you see on the offensive rebounding glass, you see on the defensive side too, his ability to get up, rise, his instincts. Truly probably one of the best 7-foot perimeter defenders I've ever evaluated. Like Jabari Smith isn't quite 7 foot, but he was like up there. He was one. Chet was pretty good as a guy. I would say he's on that level. Probably maybe a little bit better on the perimeter, but maybe not quite as good on the interior as Chet. But that's what we're talking about on defense. It's gonna be scary good.
Totally agree. I mean, he's my number one for basically that exact reason. The way that he projects, or the way that his ceiling projects as an NBA player, is one of the most valuable archetypes in the entire league right now. Like mobile 7-footer that can play inside and out on both ends of the floor. Like tell me an NBA team that wouldn't put that player in their starting lineup and, you know, have them grow into a top 2 or 3 player on that team. Like there are very few guys like that in the league. You know, like they all, if they hit, like they hit, and you've got a really, really good player on your hands. And Sarr, I think, has a great chance to be one of those guys.
The last thing I want to get to, I think, a little bit is just like some of the kind of like on-ball stuff outside of the shooting and the scoring. So like the passing, the dribbling. He is a walking turnover. I mean, his footwork, like he travels, I feel like twice a game with sloppy footwork whenever he tries to put the ball on the floor. Other teams swarm him as soon as he tries to put the ball on the floor, and he has a pretty high dribble. He's susceptible to that help defense and guards reaching in. So he's a questionable shooter, and he struggles to put the ball on the ground. That's why it sells in transition, because he doesn't have people around him. He can use his fluidity and athleticism. But in the half court, I have some real concerns about being able to do anything with the ball whatsoever. And then I actually think his passing is okay. We haven't seen a ton of flash. He played a pretty like standard role. But I think that I don't feel he has an issue like reading the game of where the ball needs to get to. I think that's fine. Just ability to actually do anything with the ball. That's where I feel like he can't always leverage some of this athleticism, touch, skill set because of that. And then just the last little thing, and we're not going to spend 20 minutes talking about screening, but I don't think I saw him make contact with a player on a screen once in like all the film. Because he just loves to like either kind of like fade out to the 3-point line or roll. He just jolts before the ball handlers even got there. Like just a terrible all-around screener. Now, if he's playing the 4 and he's got like a bigger guy out there setting screens, not as big of an issue. But if you can't screen, you can't really dribble, you can't really pass, and your shooting is questionable. I just don't know what his role is on offense. And is he going to be a guy who just like disconnects you too much that despite that defense, you just can't function well on the floor when he's out there. And that's my worry.
He has a very high center of gravity, which combined with that lack of strength, it makes him very difficult, or it makes it very difficult for him to stay on balance with the ball, like at all. If he gets touched, he's going to lose balance in some way, which is going to make him either lose the ball entirely, or he's going to have to regather himself or recorrect whatever angle he took to the rim and probably end up with a worse shot than he would have if he was able to just absorb the contact. That obviously also shows up in screening too. We definitely need to get him to the Bam Adebayo Academy of Illegal Screening, because he would, if he learned those Bam Adebayo illegal screens where you just nudge your hips or shoulders out or take like a super wide base, because he does have good footwork, like opening up onto the roll, I think. And that's kind of where you see a lot of his passing is rolling to the rim. He does some good short roll stuff every now and again. He's a pretty good like dribble handoff passer, but again, like not a great screener and doesn't handle contact well and isn't a good ball handler. So it's not like a dribble handoff per se. Like he doesn't really get into them very well. It's just the fact that he can hand off the ball or not hand it off and make a good decision out of it. But the physical aspects of his offense, or I guess of his shot creation offensively, have probably the largest way to go or longest way to go of really any skill package in his game right now, because he's not going to be able to put the ball on the deck in the NBA unless it's in the open court right now.
Yeah. Is there anything else you want to touch on with Alex Sarr?
I don't think so. I mean, should we talk about how well he fits with our Charlotte Hornets next?
Yeah, let's move on. So he would be playing the 4 in Charlotte. You'd have to probably imagine, if that were to happen, that long term it would be Mark at the 5, him at the 4, Miles Bridges at the 3, Brandon Miller at the 2, LaMelo Ball at the 1. I will say, if Alex Sarr was drafted to Charlotte, I think he's coming off the bench to start the year. I do think this is a project. I don't think this is like a ready-made player who's just going to like come in. It would not shock me, and people might be screaming at the podcast right now, but this is a player who would be playing a different position in a different league, in a different country, who is like very raw on offense. And you put all those things together, I don't know if it's an NBA starter on day one on a team that, despite being poor, Charlotte actually has some talent in that area. So I guess do you agree with that? Or do you think that he starts from day one no matter what?
No, I mean, I do agree with that, because, I mean, think about it one way. How many Charlotte Hornets rookies have started in the past 6 years? 0. None of them. I think PJ Washington was the last first-round pick that they drafted to start his first game. And that was not the expectation. Like easily the best first game from a role player that's ever happened. Like
still a record, I think, for most threes in a debut NBA game.
I believe so. Yeah, 7 threes. I think he had 27 points or something like that. Yeah, he came in on fire. That much is for sure. But that was the last time a Hornets first round pick or any Hornets draft pick started their first game. So Brandon Miller didn't do it. LaMelo Ball didn't do it. Mark Williams didn't do it. So I mean, I don't think it would be unreasonable to expect Alex Sarr to have to earn those minutes himself as well, even though it's obviously going to be a completely different front office and coaching staff and all that. Many basketball coaches and front offices share that philosophy that we're talking about right now, that you don't just get to come in and have your role guaranteed. Even if you're the number 1 pick, like you're going to have to show that you are a starter in training camp if you're going to actually start on the first night. And as much as I love Alex Sarr's game, like it's going to be hard for him to show that, mostly like physically and strength wise, that he is able to play in an NBA game like this October, like at least as a starter per se. He'll definitely be able to get on the floor, but him being starting caliber in the next basically 5 months, I think is a pretty tall task. It could happen in a Mark Williams fashion, though, where by the second half of the season, he's got the slightest amount of NBA experience, and then bam, he's ready to go. Like that wouldn't surprise me at all.
Yeah. Is there enough shooting on the floor with that lineup I mentioned? Mark Williams is a non-shooter at the 5. Alex Sarr is like you say, like at best, if he shot like 32% as a rookie, that'd be great. So let's call him like a poor spacer. Miles Bridges, who goes hot and cold, but appears to be okay. And Brandon Miller and LaMelo Ball, who are, both exceptional shooters. You see Cleveland maybe doing something similar with Jarrett Allen, Evan Mobley, Jaren Jackson Jr., Jalen Smith, like those names I mentioned earlier, all like very good shooters, really. On offense, this is one of the worst shooting teams in the league last year. I think Alex Sarr does not help that. It actually makes it very much a worse scenario. But then the defensive side, you think there'd be the plus there. And that would be such a big, tall lineup. If you think about, generating deflections, getting out in the fast break, you'd hope to think. But it would be extremely young. But my worry is that shooting. Have you got enough on the floor with those 5? Does that core make sense long term of that 5?
I think the core does make sense, but you're definitely right. Like that is not enough shooting. Like right now, as everybody's still skill sets stand in April of 2024, like no way. But I don't necessarily think that's because of Alex Sarr. Like I think part of that is like you mentioned Cleveland. Who does Cleveland have at the 3? Max Strus. He is a real shooter, like not a specialist, but back in the day, 10, 15 years ago, like that's the type of game that Max Strus would have played. The Hornets do not have that type of guy to play the 3. Like Miles is a shot creator, like volume over efficiency, like rhythm-based scorer. Max Strus is just a movement shooter that plays off the ball, gets whatever type of 3 that he needs, and that's like the first priority in his game. Like that would be the type of player that you would need in that role to maximize that lineup. Assuming Alex Sarr becomes like at least like an average shooter, like we said, like 32, 33% or something like that. If he stays at 29, then you're in trouble no matter what. But assuming Alex Sarr comes along to at least an average degree, like I think the way to maximize that lineup would, I mean, not to say you got to get rid of Miles, but to get another player that you can put in that situation. And then you have 3 like bona fide spacers, a pick and pop guy, and then a pick and roll guy in Sarr and Mark Williams.
Look, I think there's the defensive side. I really like it. The offensive side, I kind of hate it. And
not enough playmaking either. That's another problem with me.
Yeah.
You're putting everything on LaMelo and Brandon Miller to create every shot and initiate every possession.
Yeah. And you look at the best teams, this postseason, you got Minnesota, they can play through Karl Towns. You got Jokic, who can get played through in the post. You got Boston, you got guys like Kristaps Porzingis who can get played. You have guys in the front court who can handle the ball and bend the defense in different ways. And I don't think either of those guys are doing that. You're more in, like, say, in that Cleveland camp, in that maybe like Orlando camp. So I don't think it makes a ton of sense on the offensive side, but the Hornets still feel like so far away. And like if you upgrade that other spot next to LaMelo Ball and Brandon Miller with someone else, then maybe okay, you start to get a little bit more there. There's certain merits to it, but it would be a very young team. But I think they could really get after it defensively, and they would have a heck ton of length. I could see it. I could see it happening.